Hi, everyone who's already on the line with us. Thanks for joining. My name's Tim Loudon. I'm the program manager for the Digital Analytics program. I'm just going to give it another minute or so for other folks to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get going. So again, for those of you that just joined, thanks for joining us today for this Digital Analytics Program Learning Series webinar. My name's Tim Loudon, and I'm the program manager for the Digital Analytics Program, affectionately known as DAP. We are very, very excited today to have a special two-part bonus webinar series with our very good friends from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau on A/B testing. So before we really get moving, just wanted to note a few things. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube Analytics playlist in the future, and you'll receive a link to that in the follow-up email. Speaking of the follow-up email, after the webinar is done, you'll be receiving a follow-up from us with all the slides attached, as well as resources for how to join the A/B testing community, and links about DAP, and finally a survey that will ask you how you felt about today's webinar. And if we could ask you to just take 2 minutes or so to fill that out, it would be of great help to us. So at any point during the webinar, you can ask questions in the chat box, which is being monitored by my colleague, the inimitable Freddie Blicker. I can't even speak today. But Freddie will be monitoring the chat box, and at the end of the webinar, he'll be posing any questions that couldn't be answered in the chat box to our presenter, who is the fantastic friend of the program, Kelly Holden, who actually, it's funny, we were talking before this, and we share the same title. So I am the Digital Analytics Program Manager at GSA, and she is the Digital Analytics Program Manager at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So I told her it's good, I won't forget the title. Anyways, Kelly's been a longtime friend of the program, and the things they do at CFPB are really fantastic. And so when we were talking about webinars to do this year, Kelly mentioned that this was something that she was really interested in, and I said we would love to be able to show that to the Digital Analytics Program audience. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Kelly to tell us all about how CFPB is using A/B testing to improve their user experiences. Kelly.
Thanks, Tim. A glowing introduction, and just so you guys know, Digital Analytics Program Manager for me does not mean as broadly as Tim. So I can't answer too much stuff about the Digital Analytics Program, about federal agencies in general. But if you have anything about CFPB that you want to ask, you can ask me. All right, with that, I wanted to just kind of start off and let everyone know that this is, as Tim said, this is going to be a two-part series. So I'm going to be going over kind of what A/B testing is and what the best practices is that we've kind of learned over the years here at CFPB after doing tons and tons of A/B testing. Part two will be actually my colleagues, Jen Wingerberg and John Rubin, and they'll be going over more in-depth stuff about kind of what specific tests we've run and how our process looks when we run a test here at CFPB. With that, let me get started. Let me pull up my slides. So A/B testing 101. First, this is just kind of an overview of what I was just talking to do an intro about what A/B testing is, and how benefits are, and then a lot of best practices and lessons learned that we have learned over the years. So what is A/B testing? So unless you're a company like Lyft and you have just an app, you probably have a company website that's really important to you. And ideally, it's important to a lot of other people as well. So you think you created something amazing, and what your customers are too. Or maybe you're not that confident. Maybe your boss is rolling out a new benchmarking strategy and they want to see a double-digit increase in all of your metrics, or maybe you're not sure how well your site is doing or how well it should be doing. Worst of all, maybe you don't know how to fix that. Maybe you're lucky enough to do research before you built it, and if you did, that's great. Qualitative research is really, really important as well, and it kind of helps you understand what the user needs, what the drivers are, and you've tested. But if you haven't, that's okay too. If you didn't, even if your website is up and running now, as a caring product owner, maybe you realize that your product is never done and you want to keep improving it. So right now you've spent a lot of time in the lower right where you've done some qualitative looking into how people are actually using it, answering the why people are coming to your website, how they're doing things when they're on there. But you haven't really spent a lot of time in the upper left. This kind of is more the quantitative and behavioral stuff, a lot of the analytics and the what of what people are doing. Let's look into the world of A/B testing, which works closely with analytics, as I was saying, and my specialty. So what is A/B testing? When we say we want our website to quote unquote do well, we're really talking about making sure our specific user goals for each page are met. So what's success? That could be anything from making sure they sign up for a form, watch a video, use a tool, or maybe just click on a link. But these goals should make sense given the content on the page, and they should be something that the user can accomplish hopefully very easily. A/B testing is a way that we can try out more than one version of a page at the same time and see which one will get users to complete that goal more often. Essentially, what we're trying to do is to increase the conversion rate on the page. So you may ask yourself something along the lines of, why do I want to do A/B testing instead of just trying out one version of a page and then another? One of the most important reasons that we do A/B testing is to make sure that we can get the most unbiased results possible for our test with the lowest lift. So first of all, making the changes in an A/B testing tool lets you decide how long you would like to run something for, and you don't have to wait to develop a new version, publish it, make sure all the event tracking is working, and then wait for all the results. But as I will mention later, I do still highly recommend working with developers during this process. More importantly, by running both versions at the same time and splitting your users evenly between the two versions, you can assure that the results are going to be unbiased. Just imagine that you ran one version first, and during the time period that you ran it, there's a news story or something that goes out and gets users to your page doing the exact action that you wanted them to be doing. That first version is going to get really, really high results, right? And that's great for that version. But what if you then ran a second version during the next time period and the results are different? That's because you're kind of skewing the results to time periods and other like outside factors than just the versions that you're showing. So what is A/B testing? A/B testing is an analytics-driven method for validating whether suggested modifications to a digital touchpoint provide the optimal benefits for a business and its customers. In other words, A/B testing answers the what that people are doing on the page and can be thought of as a step in the process of learning more about your user intent. So for example, a content owner's goal is to reach as many people as they can, and once a person is on the page, increase the conversion rate as much as they can. A/B testing gives them actual data from the real world to help inform what kind of changes could be made and promotes getting in the testing mindset. So by giving people the option to test things out on their pages, it'll hopefully keep that curiosity peaked over time. A great example of using A/B testing to continually answer questions was when we launched a questionnaire on our site. And about 3 or 4 months later, we looked at the analytics of how many users were submitting the form. We saw that there was a point in the funnel where people were dropping off. So we sat down and we brainstormed ways to try to remedy this and ended up moving one of the questions up to see if that had any effect. What we ended up finding was that people tended to answer the questions out of order no matter how you serve them, which wasn't necessarily the goal of what the test was that we were running, but it gave us a great insight into how the users were interacting with our content. This just goes to show you that failure is just as important as success in tests and can constantly and constantly thinking about how to improve your website led to some really interesting stuff and some really interesting findings for us. What we like to think of when it comes to A/B testing is that it's kind of a part of a cyclical process of research, ideation, hypothesis, and testing. During this process, we're all using a lot of other tools that we have here at CFPB, like our web analytics or heat mapping and user experience testing to kind of help answer the questions and come up with those ideas later. What they're doing is all really working together to tell a holistic story of the user's journey and to answer the how, the what, and the why of the user's behavior. And A/B testing is a huge part of that, right? So while we're going through this process, we're always thinking of ways to improve. And then once we've come up with the research and the insights from that improvement, we go back into another idea of how to improve again. So how can A/B testing help you? A/B testing can actually help with all of the questions you see here. So have you ever asked yourself, if there's page content and you don't know if it's going to resonate with users more or less than the one that's on the page now? Have you ever had trouble getting buy-in before changing something on the site? Or have you ever been kind of afraid of doing something unless you're 100% sure it's going to make a difference or help or work the user experience? A/B testing can help with all of these. When you have two ideas on the table and you're not sure which one would be better for your audience, why not just test them both? It's such a wonderful problem to have when content creators or UX folks or web designers have multiple ideas, so why not try them? Running a test to see if something will work as you expected or not is a great option, but you do also want to make sure that you're not using testing as a way to try and force something on the pages, right? So you don't want to put something on the page just to test it to say, all right, see, this is actually the reason that I wanted to put it on. You want to make sure that you're getting the results of the test, and then that's actually informing your decision. So every design should have a purpose. Remember, when you create a test, it should be to solve a problem, and you should have the hypothesis on how the new design will help solve that problem. And that's where all of those ideas start to come in. So what are the benefits of doing A/B testing? So A/B testing can save time and resources. It can give you the confidence to make those changes that you've wanted to make on the pages. It can allow you to experiment with less risk. It can help you answer user behavior questions, and it promotes a culture of research. I keep saying things along the lines of promoting culture of research or something like that because it's really important. Since there's a lower bar for making changes, since you're only making it on one page instead of something like making it site-wide and spending a lot of developer time and energy and effort, A/B testing gives you the power to change something out of curiosity. And then you start looking at your pages and asking the question, where can I improve the user experience more? Instead of asking, how am I going to get this change on the page? I will say, although I keep mentioning that tests are a low risk way to make changes on pages, that there is a level of due diligence that you should be doing before you make a test, right? So you want to make sure that you're working really closely with your user experience team. As I said earlier, John Rubin is actually on that team and will be giving part 2 of this presentation with you along with one of my coworkers next week. And we work really closely with the designers and the developers on all the changes we make. It's important because we want to make sure that the changes are still reflecting the design of the rest of the website. And we want to make sure that the changes we're suggesting are also plausible to implement if they turn out to be successful. So my favorite part is the best practices. I'm going to go into these in more detail in the next slides, but here's just a quick list of the most important lessons that we've learned after running A/B for more than 2 years. I say lessons learned, and I mean that because a lot of these were a lot of trial and error for us. And hopefully by giving you kind of this list up front, you guys won't have to make the same mistakes to learn the same things as we did. So number 1, have a clear hypothesis and goal. I personally think this is the most important thing that you can possibly do, because the most important and the most time-consuming part of running a test is actually going to be the prep work. Before anyone comes to new versions of your pages, you need to make sure that you have a couple things completely nailed down. You want to make sure that the test you're creating is promoting the usage of the right thing on the page. The way that we do this is we usually by looking at the page with the stakeholder or the product owner, defining what the goal is, seeing what the conversion rate currently is, and then brainstorming how to make that goal more reachable. So sometimes it's moving something around the page to a more visible spot. Other times it could be something more complicated, like changing how a tool works entirely. Then after creating a variant, so that B version, you want to create a hypothesis on how you think that version of the page will help get you to your goal. So we even tell stakeholders to come up with a minimum % of increase in conversions that they're willing to see before they move forward with making any changes to the page. So you can kind of see in the image that I have here, in the zoomed in part of there, we have people actually fill out what the primary goal is that we're trying to reach, and then what the secondary goals are. The secondary goals can be other things that you want them to be doing on the pages, or it can be something like bounce rate to kind of make sure that whatever your original goal is doesn't affect the rest of the user behavior of the page. So this is something that we actually sit down with our product owners and fill out before we run any tests with them. So the one thing that I highly advise against is don't use testing, as I said before, don't use testing to force something onto the page or try to retroactively explain why a change needs to be there. That's not how testing is supposed to work, and it's cheating. So start high level. If you're a beginner in A/B testing, I would start with the more general changes like changing the messaging or copying the title of the page or moving things around to make them more visible or making clear calls to action. These are all really good ways to start understanding what kind of results you can expect to see and kind of get you into the world of A/B testing and make a clearly visible change to a page that you'll see some type of results for. Also, there are tests that you can run even if you don't have an A/B testing tool, but you know, if you have something like emails that you send out into a listserv, that's definitely an option as well. Our consumer engagement team actually has run some tests in GovDelivery where they've sent out an email, one version of an email to half their listserv, and then another version of their email to the other half of their listserv with a different title on it to see if the title has a difference or makes a difference in their opening rate. So make sure the page that you test has plenty of traffic. We've learned this one the hard way, I think, more than once. And I will say you really, really don't want to do it because it's really important to get statistically significant results. And I'll definitely go into how to better understand how long you'll need to run a test in the next slide. But just know that when you're running a test, the last thing you want to do is spend time and effort and energy, mostly time, running a test that doesn't reach statistical significance. So what is statistical significance? I keep saying this word or these words. Statistical significance is the likelihood that the difference in conversion rates between a given variation and the baseline is not due to random chance. A result of an experiment is said to have statistical significance or be statistically significant if it is not likely to be caused by chance. That's a more scientific explanation, but what does that really mean? It basically means that statistical significance is a way of proving that a certain statistic is reliable. So that means that if you make decisions based on the result, you want to make sure that the relationship actually exists. So you move something on the page, you want to have enough results in one field or another saying that thing was actually making a difference in the way that people were converting on the page. In other words, if your test doesn't reach statistical significance, you can't actually use the results to support one version of the other, which is why you're running the test in the first place. An example of this is if a page had 2 visits, for instance, one person came to the page and converted, one person came to the page and didn't. This looks like a successful test if you saw the conversion rate of 50%, but let's be honest, that's actually not really giving you any results at all. So as I said, I was going to explain how to know how long to be running a test a little bit more. So this one's really, really important, allowing enough time to run a test. You need to understand this yourself, but you also need to set expectations for anyone that's asking you to be running tests as well. So I've spent a lot of time explaining the importance of statistical significance and making sure you have enough traffic to reach it. But how do you know how much is enough? We actually worked with one of our data scientists to create an internal tool to help us answer this. But you can also find one online if you just search A/B testing calculator. I've also given a version of an A/B testing calculator here that I've used in the past. That's worked pretty well for me. But there's definitely other ones out there if you want to look around. So what goes into this tool, and how does it help you figure out how long you should run a test for? I'm not going to pretend to be a statistics major and go into the calculations behind the magic, but I can stress that the importance of the metrics are very high. Not only for the sake of giving you a duration of time that this test is going to run, but also because this is stuff that you definitely should know before running a test. So as I said earlier, the hardest and most time-consuming part of running a test is the prep work. These are the things that you need to know before you start anything else. So let's just kind of go into the elements of what this has in more detail. So the first part, if you can see here, is the estimated existing conversion rate. If you're tracking events in Google Analytics, this can definitely be found there. It's a really important number to know because you should be basing your test on a conversion not being where you want it to be. And so you should know this before filling it out, right? Like this is something that you've looked at on the page and said, oh, my conversion rate's not great. How do we improve this? And that's the number that you know coming into this test, like before you even kind of come up with ideas. The next one is the minimum improvement in conversion rate that you want to detect. Basically, how much change you need to consider the new version a success. So if you're putting another version on the page, how much time and energy, or how much % more do you want to see happening here to make it worth your time making a new design? Third part in this is the number of variations, including the control. You'll learn how I feel about this more in a couple slides, but I think that usually one variation is good, but it's really important to know how many variations you're going to be doing, because remember that you're going to have to split your traffic up with every single version that you make. That's just another slice of the traffic that you're sending another place, which means in the end, a longer test time. The next part is the average number of daily visitors, a number that you can get again from Google Analytics, and will definitely be used here to give you an estimate of days based on the current traffic. And then that last part is the % of visitors included in a test. We always do 100%, but it's possible to do less if you don't want to be giving the test version to a lot of people. So what this is going to spit out is a number of days that the test needs to run to get to statistical significance. So that's a number that you can kind of take. It's obviously going to be an estimate of how long it's going to take to get to something like that. But it's really important because it'll tell you when your test is something that you can use the results of in the end. And as I said, all the parts that go into this are something that you should definitely be sitting down and thinking about before you're even filling out this sheet. Another lesson that was hard learned was not to expect a clear winner. Tests should be unbiased, meaning that you should go into a test not thinking that your variant is going to be the winner over your control. And just keep in mind that there's always something to learn from every test. The picture that you're seeing here is a great example of us going into a test thinking that the new version was going to win and being completely wrong. So the new design was on the right-hand side was clickable. It showed more content from below better. So we were thinking that people were going to click on that featured box within the red box there more, and we thought they were going to be clicking on the links down below more. But it actually ended up performing almost exactly the same as the original design. This just goes to show you that you learn just as much from failing as you do from getting a result that you expected. In this case, by running this test on one page instead of launching it across the site, we save developers time and energy by just showing that changing the design wouldn't change the results on the page. So like making that change wasn't actually worth a lot of the developers' time. It's also a great example of why A/B testing is important, since we all thought that this new design was going to be better in every way, and it turns out that getting real world results proved us completely wrong. to test one variant at a time. I said this before. I do not like doing more than one version at the same time, although there are instances that you can do more than one. But I'm definitely a huge proponent of what it says here, more is not always better. As I was saying earlier, I'm a huge proponent of testing one variant at a time. We ran a test when we first started where we changed the title of the page to see what kind of effect it would have on the user engagement with the page. But as you can see here from the results that are showing, that we use 5 variants plus a control, which means 6 different versions of the page. Never got results since our traffic had to be split up 6 ways. And you can see that the results for pretty much every single version were like middle of the road in conversions, and the improvement value that you see in the second column is between -30 and 40%, meaning that it's pretty much the test can't tell if it's good or bad from the data we have. So I believe that this was a test that got us thinking that we should be using a calculator to better understand how long we should be needing to run something. So I'm just really glad that we learned it early on and we got ourselves a tool to be able to understand this stuff in the future. So another example of when trying to fit too many variables will just muddle your results is putting too many variables into your variant. So I'm not saying here that all tests need to be one tiny change on the page. I'm also saying that it always needs to be one change on the page. But what I am saying is that your changes need to be deliberate, because if you change too many things on the page, you're never going to know which element actually gave you the results that you're looking for. So for instance, if you wanted a button to be clicked more and you made it bigger and then put it at the top of the page, who's to know if the size made more people click, or if the placement made people more click more, or if it was a mix of both of them together. Users on your site somewhere be able to say that thing, that making it bigger or more conversions from it, just know that you can't pick or choose out of that which one actually made that happen. It's kind of more muddled just because you have so many different things going on in one test. And this is, I think, one of the most important things, because our motto here at CFPB is that good ideas can come from anywhere. Everyone has a different point of view, especially when they're working in different places, and they look at the website in a different way, right? So we work really closely with our stakeholders or our product owners to understand what the goal of the page is, and then try to come up with ideas from there. So for example, I use the example that I used earlier about the questionnaire that we put on our website. We had a meeting with the stakeholder 3 or 4 months later, and took a look at the analytics. The product owner saw that there was a drop off somewhere, so we kind of brainstormed ways that we could make that drop off go away. And then we ran the tests, saw that it actually didn't have too much of an impact on where it was. But it was something that was really good because it helped us pique our curiosity and keep in mind that there's always room for improvement when it comes to stuff like that. And it was really nice to work with a product owner on something like that, right? Because they obviously know their product really well, and they know what the goals are of the page, and sitting with them and kind of saying, all right, is this where you expect it to be, or is there something that we can do to improve it? They are usually really excited about it and become kind of someone that will back you or support you on the changes that you're making on the page later. This also brings up another great avenue for what we want to test. So when we were looking at the stuff 3 to 4 months after launch with the product owner, we obviously used a bunch of our analytics tools and the digital analytics team, our team. We're actually constantly looking at heat maps and session recordings from our heat mapping tool, and we're looking at the conversion rates on the page using Google Analytics and our dashboards. we're creating visualizations for our product owners to look at so that they understand this stuff. So we have a general knowledge of a lot of the different stuff on the website, and an in-depth knowledge of a lot of like what the goals should be and where they should be, right? So we try really hard to improve these pages, and working with us is always great. So and we also work really closely with the user experience team. Again, John Rubin being one of those members, and rely on their expertise on the qualitative side of user behavior, because it is really important to know just general best practices for how people are going to be using a page. Is there a spot on the page where people are kind of that are catching their eye more than others, or is there a color that people are going to want to look at more, or is there a size of a button that's better, or is there something on the page that really throws users off or something like that? We get a lot of that stuff from actually talking to people, and the people who actually talk to users who are using our website are the user experience team. And then the last thing here is that if you're kind of looking for a place to start running some tests, there are always going to be pages on the site that haven't been touched in a long time. And I bet you that if you look at those, there are going to be some improvements that you can make by just looking at the analytics and running a few tests. All right, so that is all I have for today. Thank you so much for joining me. And just a reminder, there is going to be a part 2 at the of this presentation next week. So be sure to join again when my colleagues Jen Wingerberg and John Rubin dive deep into the tests that we've run in the past and talk through what our process for getting a test up and running looks like. And if you've enjoyed this presentation, I encourage you to join our A/B testing community. If you want any information about that, just email me for details. My email is here.
Thank you, Kelly. That was great and super informative. So Kelly, can you give us an idea of what to expect in next week's part 2 of the webcast?
Yeah, so as I said, I will not be presenting that one, but my 2 colleagues will be. And this one was kind of a tee up to what A/B testing is, obviously, and what the best practices are. And what they'll be doing next week is going into a couple of the tests that we've had that we've thought of as really, really good examples of kind of types of tests that you can run. And then they'll also go into the process of how we do testing. So who we involve, what steps there are. Like I was saying earlier, we sit down with the stakeholders at one point and go through the matrix. They'll be talking a lot about that type of stuff and kind of who we work with and how we get it done.
That's great. Very cool. Okay, so we have some questions to dive into.
Great.
So let me start out with our first question. I believe in the beginning you had referenced an Excel sheet or a spreadsheet that you used. We got a question from somebody about whether you would be providing the Excel sheet.
I don't see any problem in providing that. It's actually really, really helpful for us, especially when we're just trying to think through a test and understand kind of almost for ourselves how things work. So I'd be more than happy to kind of share a template version of this Excel spreadsheet for sure.
Awesome, that's great. Okay, so what tool does CFPB use for A/B testing? I think that'll be really informative for folks here to think about as they go through their journey of learning this and getting up and running.
Yep, that's a really good question. So we use Optimize, which is the Google tool for our A/B testing. It obviously works really well with Google Analytics and can be implemented through Tag Manager, which is really, really nice. We did look into using things like Optimizely. Before we had Optimize, we actually did some testing kind of by just changing some of the code on the pages as well. But yeah, we use Optimize and we're very happy with it. I think we've had it for almost 2 years now. And there are definitely some pros and cons to using it. So if anyone has any questions about kind of what numbers you should be looking at or anything like that, just let me know. Because we actually ran an AA test on our Optimize, like in Optimize, and we came out with a couple of really cool insights that kind of help us understand how we should be looking at the results in there too. So if anyone's interested in that, please let me know.
Very cool. And is Optimize free or do you have to pay for that?
That's a good question. I believe there's a free version. We have the paid version, and I don't think there's too much of a difference. I think that it's honestly the biggest difference is that you can have more than one conversion goal in the paid version. So I
Interesting.
believe it's free. Mhm.
Okay, got it. So folks on the webcast should check out to see if they're able to access it for free first before they think about trying to procure it.
Yeah, and I think that the free version would answer probably 99% of everything. It's just that a little extra that they have in the paid version.
Got it. Good to know. Are there any other tools that you've heard of other folks or teams using them in government?
I believe other places use Optimizely, and Tim, you might actually have a better insight into other tools that are being used. But I know of Optimizely, and then as I said, even if you don't have an A/B testing tool for your website, things like doing A/B testing on your email or something like that. Like as I said, our consumer engagement team did some A/B testing in GovDelivery with either their titles or the design of the email. And that's a really good way of starting into A/B testing too, and getting some results that way. And just because it's on email doesn't mean that you can't use those results and that information to kind of guide some changes on your website as well.
That's great. So obviously CFPB is very lucky to have a designated UX team and a team for analytics. What are your recommendations for folks and teams at different agencies that are wearing multiple hats and don't have these types of teams?
That's a really good question. As you definitely just said, we are really, really lucky here at CFPB because we also have data scientists at hand who made that awesome tool that we use for understanding how long a test should be running. But I would say that as I was saying in that last slide, ideas can come from everywhere, and you can work with a lot of different people to kind of like spread that hat around, I guess.
Got it.
Because it is really hard to, I mean, as somebody that also does the analytics and the tag management on our website, I totally see, and the SEO on our website, I totally see how multiple hats are really hard to wear, especially when it's one person. But yeah, I mean, we work really, really closely with developers, and it's kind of, you can think of it as an opportunity to kind of reach out to others and see, what ideas they have and how they can help you kind of create these tests.
That's great. Thank you. So we've got a couple other questions from the audience. First one is, what is the difference between an A/B test and an AA test?
Great question. So I was just talking about this. So the A/B test, what I was talking about was when you're testing one variation of your page to another variation of your page. An AA test is actually just running the same variation of your page and splitting the traffic between the two. So making absolutely no changes to the B version and then running that just kind of, so the reason that we did it on our website was because we kind of wanted to run, it's kind of used as like a diagnostic test to see kind of like what kind of results would we get if we just ran the same page next to each other. So that was a really interesting test to run just to kind of see what kind of results we would get and see if like one would come out with way better results or something like that. That was actually an idea that John came up with. I think he saw on a couple of blogs that people had done it before and seen some really interesting results.
Very interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so our last question, and I would encourage any folks in the audience to please submit any questions as I'm speaking to our last question here, if you'd like to get an answer today. How do you get the variant version onto the page? And how do you get it to look as good as the control? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. As I said, well, first of all, in the tool Optimize, the way that this kind of works is to kind of get into the technical side. Optimize is the Google tool. You get a code or a script that you can put on the page, or you can put it through Google Tag Manager and it gets injected on the page through your tag management system. That way, whenever you want to be running a test on a page, you just put in the URL of the page, and then you can kind of work off of that one. And then once you publish that, it will go live. And to answer the second part of that, and to give kind of a warning for the first part of that, it will go live. That means that it is really important to make sure it is up to the standards that you're expecting it to be. And as I said, we work really, really closely with our developers and our user experience people and our designers to make sure that all the tests that we have are looking and feeling and are kind of mirroring the same style as the rest of our website and are kind of up to the right standards. So we definitely do a lot of work with them, but Optimize and other tools do make it pretty easy to make changes, especially like copy changes and stuff like that. So if anyone's kind of interested in that too, we have done in our A/B testing community, we've done kind of some run throughs of some tools. So if you want to join our group and suggest doing another walkthrough of a tool, I think we'd be more than happy to do that. People love to see that stuff. Yeah.
That's great. And looks like we have one final question here. Again, about the variant version. So when a variant version is implemented, is there a flash for the user because the page adjusts for the testing tool variations?
Right. So that is something that we have run into before, for sure. The thing that Tag Manager came out with to make that flash go away was putting the Tag Manager script into the code of the page in the header instead of the body. So that when the page loads, it loads the new version before the page loads and then flashes, like this person saying. But we've run into a couple of errors with that as well. And I've worked with a developer to, he actually had to put, I think, a little bit more complicated of a script on the page. I think a little bit higher up, and I will have to kind of check into this again. But I think he put it up a little higher on the page that kind of delayed the page to make sure that the new version would load before there was that flicker.
Got it. Okay, we have another question. Lots of folks are getting involved here. That's great.
All right.
How do you avoid any type of issues with SEO and duplicate pages in the context of different variations?
Mm-hmm. So the one thing that we have actually discussed quite a bit over here at CFPB is how can we use our tools for SEO, which is kind of the exact opposite of what this question is. One of the things that happens when you're running this test, and I will double check this and make sure I'm right, but the way that we've been kind of running under the influence of is when you make a change in an A/B test, that doesn't actually affect the real content of your page. And so the SEO bots will still be looking and crawling the original version of your page. And then, so we've actually been talking about, as I said, trying to make versions of the page that we could test our SEO on, but it's actually impossible in the tool that we have just because it won't actually take into account the stuff that's in the B version of the page. So it shouldn't affect SEO in any good or bad way if you're putting in a B version on the page.
Got it. That's very insightful. Thank you. Well, It looks like we don't have any other questions. So I think that concludes today's webinar. For the audience, please don't forget to tune in to part 2 next week on the 7th. Also, please note that we'll put the survey in the chat box, and we'll also follow up with everyone with an email with the survey. We definitely appreciate your feedback, and thank you for attending today's webinar.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.